Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for a joint Tax Practitioners Board and Beyond Blue webinar. My name's Julie Shaw, and I'll be hosting today's session. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Tax Practitioners Board acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Now, today's webinar has been created to connect directly with you, the tax practitioner community. We value your opinion, and today's an opportunity to raise any questions that you have directly with us. Following today's webinar, we'll provide you with a copy of the presentation slides and some helpful hyperlinks. Now, we'll send these to you via the email address that you used to register for today's session. You can also access the slides now by visiting the Webinars Resources Hub on our website at tpb.gov.au/webinar-hub. I'd also like to remind you that today's webinar will count towards your continuing professional education, and you can claim 1 hour for attending. However, I will just note that we do not issue attendance certificates. So let's have a look at what we're going to cover today. So in today's webinar, we'll share some of the ways you can improve your mental health and navigate stressful situations. In particular, we'll look into what mental health is, indicators of wellbeing and mental ill health risk factors. We'll look at Australian community experience of mental health over the 2020-2021 years. We'll look at approaches to mentally healthy workplaces, protective factors to support mental health at work. We'll look at some practical examples, including some of those with the working at home and working remotely. We'll take a look at self-care at work. We'll also look at how business advisors can access important mental health information for themselves and for others. We'll look at some free practical mental health tools and supports, including tools to stay well and tools to support others. We'll look at the risks that small business owners are exposed to, and we'll also look at supporting your clients that are small business owners. And then to finish up, we'll answer some of the common questions that we received during the webinar today. So make sure that you submit those questions via the chat box there today. So just before I introduce our guest speakers from Beyond Blue, I'd like to just briefly remind you about the concessions that the TPB have in place when it comes to mental health matters. So here at the TPB, we do understand that many tax practitioners are likely struggling with the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Juggling competing priorities and working hard to support your clients is no easy task. We recognise that it's important to manage your mental health and wellbeing during these difficult times, and we've put together some temporary measures to help support you. So firstly, when it comes to CPE, any education activity relevant to the tax agent, BAS, or tax financial advice services that you provide that maintains, develops or promotes your skills, knowledge or attributes is generally considered a CPE activity under our policy. However, we are currently also accepting a small amount of educative health and wellbeing activities undertaken until the 30th of June 2022. So that could include activities such as attending webinars like you're doing today, and this one is going to be able to help you manage your mental health. So those activities will be relevant CPE that you can count towards your CPE hours for the purposes of the TPB. Secondly, we have also removed the 25% cap for relevant technical or professional reading activities in our CPE policy, and that also will be running through until the 30th of June 2022. I just want to make you aware here that you do actually need to first and foremost explore and undertake CPE offerings and keep a logbook detailing all of those activities undertaken. And then thirdly, we've also waived the requirement to lodge your annual declaration. So if your annual declaration is due on or before the 30th of June 2022, you don't have to complete that until 2023 or 2024. So that means if your registration is due in 2023. So just keep in mind that while these concessions are in place, you must continue though to meet your other obligations around professional indemnity insurance, fit and proper requirements and personal tax obligations. Importantly though, I'd also like to highlight that we encourage you to contact us if your ability to meet your tax practitioner obligations is affected, and we'll work with you to resolve any of the outstanding matters that you may have. Okay, so let's get on to our speakers. We're really fortunate today to have several representatives from Beyond Blue joining us. For those of you that might be a little bit less familiar with the organisation, Beyond Blue have been providing support and services to people in Australia for 20 years, and they are the country's most well-known and visited mental health organisation. So I'd like to welcome our speakers from Beyond Blue. We have Mel Novak, a Small Business Engagement Manager. We also have Linda Sheahan, and she's a Wellness Prevention Engagement Manager, and we have Tim Hoopman, a Small Business Advisor. So thank you all for joining us. Linda, I'll hand over to you to begin today's presentation.
Thank you so much, Julie. We are so glad to be here and we're really grateful. I'd like to quickly echo the acknowledgement of country. Thank you to the TCB for organising this session, and a huge thank you to you all for watching. We hope it's really enjoyable CPD, but also really useful for you as well. Next slide, please. For those who might not be familiar with Beyond Blue, as Julie mentioned, we're one of Australia's most well-known mental health organisations. We're a not-for-profit and we receive bipartisan support from all Australian state, territory and federal governments. It means that all our services are free, evidence-informed, evidence-based, and they're really there for you all to use. We also receive really extensive support across the community. So for everyone who's ever accessed Beyond Blue, read our information or helped fundraise for us, we are so incredibly grateful for your support. Our vision is to help all people in Australia achieve their best possible mental health, and we deliver on 3 strategic priorities. They are promoting mental health and wellbeing, being a trusted source of information, advice and support, and working together to prevent suicide. Next slide, please. The presentation today will be in 4 parts. Firstly, I'll briefly summarise current trends. I'll then talk about the things we can do for our mental health and wellbeing, both individually and at a work level. That'll be fairly quick, but we've curated a really good list of tools and resources that are going to be sent to you all afterwards. So if that feels very quickly, please feel free to get in touch with us afterwards. After that, my colleague Mel will start speaking a little bit about small business. This might touch you individually if you work in a small business or if you're a small business owner. It might impact people you know or people you work with. As tax practitioners, we hear again and again the importance of those relationships to small business people. We'll then have a really quick live interview. I'll get to speak with Mel and Tim, and we'll explore some really practical examples of supporting yourself and others. Next slide, please. So really quickly, first we're going to look at current mental health trends in Australia. Next slide. To get started, it's really useful to remind ourselves of what we mean by mental health, what that common understanding and definition is. When we're talking about mental health, we're not just talking about mental illness, but positive mental health also. Just like our physical health, our mental health exists along a continuum. So on the slide at the moment, you'll see the green end, that's the healthy end. And this is where if you've got good mental health, you might feel happy, you might feel positive, you might be sleeping well, you might be enjoying the things you like, but generally you feel like yourself. In the middle, the amber, that's where things are starting to be a little bit less positive and you might notice things slipping a bit. It might be where you're not sleeping as well, you could be worrying more, you could be finding it harder to find enjoyment in the things that you usually like, and you're just starting to notice things are a bit off. And that red end of the spectrum, that's where we can be experiencing symptoms, more substantial symptoms, and feeling quite unwell. Importantly, and some of the takeaways from this continuum definition, is that our mental health isn't static, but it changes over time. This means mental health, it responds really well to treatment. We know that people who are in the amber or in the red, generally, we can pull back towards the amber and the green. And also our mental health isn't static. So some days you might be feeling great, some days you might be feeling not so great. And I think that sense of shifting coping really resonates at the moment with all the things that we're working through. Importantly, and I mentioned this before, our mental health can be influenced. Just like our physical health, our mental health can be nurtured, strengthened, and protected. So why does this matter? Our mental health and our context around mental health is one of significant need. In Australia, it's usually estimated that 1 in 5 of us are likely to be impacted by poor mental health in any year. 2 million people live with anxiety and 1 million people live with depression, and almost 50% of us are likely to be impacted by poor mental health sometime over our lifetimes. Tragically, on average, more than 8 people in Australia take their lives each day, 6 of whom are men. Suicide is the leading cause of death for people in Australia aged between 11 and 44, and it's higher than the national road toll. So it's a really big community need. That said, there have been really strong improvements over the last 20 years. For example, in the construction industry, there have been reductions in the risk of suicide, and this aligns with a better understanding and practice around mental health. So overall, and I think the key takeaway here is that we've come a really long way in Australia around mental health over the last 20 years. Our capability has improved. We're having conversations like today, but it's really important for us to continue on this journey. So we are really glad that you're here with us. Next slide, please. In terms of the impact of COVID-19 on Australia and the pandemic, at Beyond Blue, we've seen our average monthly demand for the support service increase 30% on average each month during the pandemic. And this is, keep in mind that there were things happening before the pandemic. We had droughts and bushfires and floods and economic challenges as well. So it's been a tough time. We've seen themes including increased distress, uncertainty, financial distress and loneliness. Particularly in New South Wales and Victoria, we see greater exhaustion, isolation, relationship and family tensions, languishing and concern. For workers and workplaces, so when we've got our work hats on, the impact of uncertainty and rapid change is significant for everything from safety to borders to HR. People are experiencing loneliness and isolation, particularly those working remotely. A lot of us are experiencing digital intensity. There's an increase in email volume and online meetings, for example. And we've also got this ongoing, to some extent, financial and economic and planning uncertainty. How do we see these trends? Well, Beyond Blue has supported over 10 million people via our website since March last year. That's people seeking information and advice. And our support services have had over 500,000 contacts. We're also not the only ones receiving, sharing information and giving support. So the scale is really significant. Data insights in our community relationships allow us to hear the issues that people are facing and what workplaces and small businesses are experiencing and feeling. That said, despite all those challenges, we've seen some incredible strengths and opportunities also. And I think we really need to celebrate and lean into these. We've seen a renewed focus on the importance of mental health. So, for example, and this is consistent with that uptick in information and people coming to Beyond Blue sites that we've seen. An ABS survey from mid-2021 found that since early 2020, 72% of Australians had used one or more strategies to help support, manage and protect their mental health. This is incredible and it's great. And we want to see that really continue, people taking that proactive approach to look after themselves. We've seen great advancements in digital access. I mean, look at us now. We've seen greater empathy and discussion of mental health. So while these challenges have been really real and significant, there's this great appetite and capability before us as we keep going. Jump quickly to the next slide. This slide summarises just some of the things that we're hearing again and again at the moment, really common sentiments. So often we hear people saying, I'm all right and others are much worse off than me. And then we'll hear them speak to challenges switching off, fatigue of hearing about COVID, challenges focusing, exhaustion, and this really common sentiment about things taking longer to do than usual. I'd say really quickly, these are some of the signs that wellbeing and self-care can matter right now. I'd also really like to stress that if you are in distress, if you're coming up to that red end of the spectrum, seek support. We're going to be speaking a lot about self-care mechanisms, but experiencing some challenge, but please seek support if you've got any question in your mind. Next slide. We found this analogy really useful and is based on some strong community feedback over the last year. And the essence of this is that people are in such very different circumstances, and that impacts their experience of COVID. COVID can be seen like a storm. We're all going through this together. At the same time, we're all in quite different circumstances. We might have different anchors. We might have different boats. We have different capacities and experiences. I've just got a note from one of the other speakers that my connection might have dropped out. So I will keep going, but please let me know if that's problematic. Despite all
those coming through fine.
Oh, thank you, Julie. I'll keep ploughing through. So despite those differences in capacity and anchor and experience, we do all have different circumstances around us. I think that can unite us, and it's helped everyone regardless of those experiences. We can have different skill levels around mental health. We can have different abilities around mental health. This is something we can work on. It can be really empowering. So this is a really important time to focus on our wellbeing and our mental health literacy. And that's something I really hope you can all take away from this session. We do want to recognise, however, how different everyone's circumstances are. And for those reasons, this is why the structural approaches to workplace mental health are so important as well. I'm sorry, if you can hear anything behind me, I think my dog is dreaming. So we will keep going. Next slide, please. And I think we're going to jump to a poll. We're going to look at things we can do, and I'll throw to Julie very quickly.
Thanks for that, Linda. Yep, we'll just move on to the poll now. So the polls are just going to pop up on your screen once we set them live, and we've got some multiple choice options for you to choose from. So I'll just read out the question for you. What we're asking here is, what are some things that you can do to look after your mental health? So the options that we've got for you to choose from here are get sweaty, engage in regular exercise, get regular high quality sleep, ideally about 7 to 9 hours every night, stay connected with others in keeping with public health guidelines, of course, and seek support if you're not feeling great. It's a sign of strength. So we're just going to open the poll up. So as I said, it should pop up on your screen for you, and we just want you to select the response that's most appropriate for you. And then we'll come back and we'll share the results with everyone and have a chat about that.
Thank you so much, Julie, and everyone.
Yeah, we'll just keep it open for a couple seconds longer. And I'll just mention too, I've had a couple of people asking about getting a copy of the slides after the presentation today. And yes, we will send them through. And you can also access them on our website at the moment on our webinars hub page. So yeah, they're there for you at the moment. Okay, so we might just close that poll off. We'll share those results so that everyone can see them. But Linda, what I've got here so far is about 30% of people are saying they should be getting sweaty and getting regular exercise. Got about 23% saying get regular high quality sleep. About 29% saying stay connected with others, and about 19% are saying that they would seek support if they're not feeling great. So I'll just hand it back to you and you can go through that.
Thanks so much, Julie. And of course, all the answers are correct. We actually set the poll up so you could answer yes to more than one of those. And it's really fabulous seeing the variety and the understanding of the different things that work for people. I think myself, I'm one of those people who really needs to exercise regularly to keep myself well. And of course, sleep is so critical. I just really stress as well that importance of connection and support. They can be really closely linked, and we'll speak about that a bit more in the presentation. We jump to the next slide. This will really quickly show you some of the beautiful, fabulous ways to look after your mental health. And let's remember, these things work. We know that anxiety and depression are common and treatable. We know that it's beneficial to seek help early but never too late. We know that poor mental health is not a weakness, and we know that by talking openly about mental health, we can raise awareness and reduce the associated stigma. These things on the slide on the slide at the moment, I'd really stress as well that financial stress, one in the middle. The more we talk about it, the more we work on it. And I'm saying this to tax practitioners, we know it can also help people's mental health as well. For the slides, yes, that's perfect. Thank you. We'll just jump to the next slide in terms of what works in the community. And these are some of the themes that sit behind those things that we know that work. These are some of the common domains of personal wellbeing, and I'll speak to these really briefly because it sort of builds out some of the theory behind those actions you can take. Firstly, the first one up there is acceptance, and the theory behind acceptance is it does actually help to recognise and acknowledge what we're going through. This is hard. Don't sugarcoat it. It can be a bit annoying. That said, within acceptance is also the importance of acknowledging the challenges that we've faced, but also the positives of what we've experienced. Many of our plans haven't gone on track, so redefining those achievements and the things that we have done in the face of those challenges is really important and a really great part of acceptance that can help your well-being. And this is the whole idea of gratitude and taking notice of the things that have worked and also redefining in the face of the adversity that we've faced. The second one there, health and health awareness. Most of you identified some great health things that you can do for your mental health. It's a really important time to keep up your healthcare, but particularly in the context of restrictions easing and the challenges, you know, a lot of us have been pushing quite hard for a couple of years now. It's a good time to think about taking a break and really thinking around what you might need to help recover and restore as we go into this next change period. There's some really great research around people coming out of extreme environments like Antarctica, like coming back from space. There's this thing called the W-curve hypothesis, and it basically says it's going to take a while. There'll be ups and downs as we transition back, but be really kind and listen to yourself in this context and think of those wellbeing things you can do that help yourself, like really getting enough sleep, like having some boundaries, like even taking an extra holiday over Christmas if your leave allows you to do that. But really listen to your body and think around what you need at this sort of time. The third one there, connection, is really critical. Connection isn't just about support, it's about shared experience. And really, this might be family and friends, it might be with work, it might be having a hobby that diversifies the people you know. But sharing these experiences with different groups of people in our lives can be really powerful and protective for our well-being. The fourth one there, self-care. Some great ones we've touched on are things like routine, having time out for yourself, setting boundaries and enforcing those boundaries, seeking help when needed, and it's a really good time for mindfulness, which is a great technique to slow down racing thoughts if you're having any trouble sleeping or you're experiencing that challenge with focus. That's one of the things that mindfulness really addresses and could be worth looking into. Really quickly, I mentioned support. Support is both giving and receiving help. Giving help to others can be incredibly good for your mental health. Receiving support is also for many a learned skill as well, and being open to accepting help. We want to stress that most people aren't great at recognising when help can be beneficial to them. There's one study out there which shows that I think people with anxiety on average can wait up to 8 years before seeking support for the first time. So if in doubt, give it a try. Speak to your GP, speak to somebody that you trust, try contacting one of the support services, and they can be used to learn more about the types of services out there or how you might go about accessing them. It's not just if you're in crisis. The last one I really want to quickly mention is the hope budget. And what we mean by this is thinking about the things in life that give you purpose. What are the things that light your spark? And at this time of year, really starting to think about the things that can fill up your hope budget. What are some of the things that can keep you looking forward, keep you motivated, redefining and acknowledging those achievements and finding the things and the activities that energize us and really protecting them. So remember, wellbeing isn't a zero-sum game. It's something that we can all build and foster. It doesn't need to be expensive. It doesn't need to be incredibly time-intensive, but it's really important to look after yourself. And I'd really encourage out of this session, if you could take one thing out of this presentation and do it for yourself and another this week, that would be such a fabulous win that we would be so excited about. I'm going to speak now quickly about work and mental health in a work context, and we'll go pretty quickly through this, and I'll signpost some of the other areas that you can check in and lean out to. Now, workplace mental health and mental health at work, it's a little bit different to in our personal lives. If we just go back one slide quickly, there are some barriers in a work context, which is why we need a little bit more at work. It's not just about making everyone focus on their well-being. Some of the barriers include things like whether people perceive help as effective, people's mental health literacy, so we don't necessarily see, recognise where we're up to or how we're going. There can be a lot of stigma in workplaces, not just our belief that others might look differently at us, but it's also how we look at ourselves and our worry about the impact it might have on our careers or being a burden on others. Another really big gap at work is often people don't seek support because they just believe their work is inherently stressful. And so what's the point? It's an empty bucket you're just pouring more water into. And I think these are some big challenges and big issues that we're really working to change at the moment around workplace mental health. So first key takeaway from this slide is there's been real improvements around stigma for workplace mental health in Australia. One study found that 61% would still avoid telling others about a mental health condition, and they felt shame as well. About 33% felt shame. But the majority, and this is where we're seeing these improvements, really, there's trouble seeing the slides. A majority reported that they would be incredibly supportive of a colleague who experienced a mental health condition, and this is a huge improvement for people out there. Likewise, the bottom of this slide shows some of the challenges that people experience in a work context. And this is where we're getting to some of the critical factors that we can move and we can work on in workplace mental health. Next slide. So, a definition of a mentally healthy workplace. What is mentally healthy work? It can be, and this is the definition that Beyond Blue uses, we talk to the integrated approach by Professor Tony LaMontagne, and this is very similar to the model of workplace mental health that's being picked up by a national working group called the National Workplace Initiative, which sits in the National Mental Health Commission. Now, what this means is essentially at work, we need to focus on three core elements. That is protecting against risk to mental health, promoting good health, and supporting people in times of challenge. The good news is in Australia, we've come a really long way around support in workplaces in the last 20 years. A lot of businesses now have EAP. If there isn't EAP, there are other supports out there that people can turn to. And there's one called New Access for Small Business Owners that we'll speak to a bit more shortly. We're seeing a lot of improvement around promoting good health. We're having conversations like never before. We're seeing workplaces much more supportive of wellbeing. The big opportunity and where a lot of work is being done at the moment around workplace mental health is this protect arm. It's around how we recognise risks and protective factors to mental health at work. We just jump to the next slide very quickly. This briefly summarises some of the things you might feel day to day in risks and protections to workplace mental health. So if I asked you what stressed you out at work, it might be things like deadlines, digital intensity, job demands, isolation. It could be customers who can be aggressive or frustrated at times. And these are examples of the psychosocial risks that Safe Work Australia has identified around workplace mental health and where employers have obligations to manage and protect our work risk factors. And these are legally, it's just like you can't have, wires and cables and people can't just wander around with ladders everywhere anymore. It's the same for our mental health risks, but this is where a lot more work is being done in terms of empowering workplaces in Australia. We also know what the protections are and how to build them up. These are things like flexibility, connection, job control, work design, progression, and how we prioritise our work demands so that work is achievable and sustainable. And there are some really good guides out there now to help identify and design work in really safe ways, and we'll send those out afterwards. The last slide for me as we finish up, in the next slide, there are some really great tools out there to help around your workplace mental health. We've gathered these into 2 or 3 categories, which you'll get afterwards. Some are tools to build mentally healthy workplaces. These are things like free evidence-based tools to identify workplace risk factors, job design, and also tools to help your wellbeing. I'll stop for now and I'll hand over to my colleague Mel, who will speak more about small business mental health and how we can support small business owners.
Thank you so much, Linda, for such a great insight into health trends, mental health trends, and things we can do to look after our mental health. Now, this part of the presentation is really looking at the small business community and what can we do to support ourselves as small business owners, and what can we do to support those who are small business owners who might be going through a challenging time. And I know that this is probably a really pertinent and relevant conversation to have for so many of you who are listening today, who may have experienced challenges yourself or may have dealt with clients or friends or associates who you know are going through a tough time at the moment. So this part of the presentation is really dedicated to those people within the small business community and looking what we can do to support those within those roles. So if we look first of all at why small business. So the question here is really why are small business owners at a higher risk than perhaps a wider portion of the population? And I think there's some really interesting statistics shown on this slide. So the first statistic I want to point out here is that 97% of businesses in Australia are sole operators and small businesses. So that just shows how significant this community is in Australia. You could describe it as the backbone of the Australian economy in terms of that's how significant the small business owner is. Half of the Australian workforce is employed by a small business. So that just gives you an indication of the magnitude of people that can be impacted if a small business owner isn't feeling 100% or if their mental health isn't exactly where it should be. A couple of other really interesting points here is that 25% of small business owners have in a recent study have showed that they had high levels of psychological distress. And that's compared with 36% of sole traders. Sole traders here shown as suffering with even higher levels of psychological distress. And these figures just weren't seen when we looked at the same sample size with medium to large size organisations. So this really shows the amount of pressure small business owners are on. And perhaps when we see that difference between small business owners and sole traders, it raises a bit of a question around the importance of connection and isolation and working on your own. Of course, COVID plays a really important part here. And I think it would be hard for us to perhaps find a small business owner who hasn't been impacted by the effect of COVID over the last 2 years. We've seen some business owners whose businesses have just been completely decimated by the pandemic. And there's still, sadly, some business owners who haven't been able to work since the pandemic first began, which we're talking about March, not March this year, but March last year. So the impact of COVID has been significant. There's a hashtag that went around, which was, we're all in this together. And the feedback that we get from a lot of small business owners is that, we just didn't feel that way. We didn't feel like we were included. We didn't feel like we were in all this. We were really in this together. In fact, we really felt like we were on our own. And small business owners we have to remember, even pre-pandemic, they've had a lot of stress to deal with natural disasters. We've had fires, we've had floods. All of these things have really added to the distress that a small business owner is under, and really shows that they've been doing it tough for a really long time. Financial distress, having to reduce teams or lay staff off has been very distressing for small business owners, particularly when you come from a small business. Your staff or your team, it's really like your family. It's very different to how it would be when you're working in a larger corporations. So really, the general uncertainty around COVID and what will happen in the weeks and months ahead have really contributed to this emotional and mental distress that small business owners are feeling, and really show that why they're at a higher risk perhaps than the wider population. So in terms of the solution, we introduced with Beyond Blue, there was a jointly conceived initiative, New Access for the Small Business Owners was launched in March, and it's a jointly conceived initiative between Beyond Blue and ASBFIO. And the best way to explain this program is that it's a mental health coaching program, particularly for small business owners. You have to be a small business owner in order to qualify, and what that means is you just have to have less than 20 staff and be running your own business or be self-employed. The reason why the program was launched was really in response to the government research, which I mentioned earlier, which looked at the impact of the pandemic on small business owners and found that the impact on small business owners' mental health had been significant. The program itself offers 6 free coaching sessions, and what makes the program really unique is that each coaching session is completely free, it's completely confidential, it doesn't require a doctor's referral, and what's really great about the program is that the coaches themselves, they haven't come from a clinical background, they're actually people who've come from a small business background themselves, so they understand the challenges that small business owners go through because they've walked in the same shoes themselves. The program's also highly accessible. It's available between the hours of 8 a.m, 8 p.m, Monday to Friday, which means that business owners can call from home or from work, whatever's convenient with them and will fit with their current schedule. So why small business owners? Why are small business owners highlighted? Why were they chosen to have this program designed for? And there's really 3 key issues here that I want to make clear. The first one is that small business owners are incredibly time poor. And this was really highlighted in the research that was done last year. There were even some business owners that said, you know, I have struggled with my mental health, or maybe I am feeling the signs of depression or anxiety, but I just don't have time to see anybody about it because I have to focus on my business. My business is demanding all of my time. So we knew that small business owners were incredibly time poor, and that could be a huge barrier to them seeking help. Small business owners often prioritize the needs of others and their business over themselves. And we certainly saw this in the last 20 months with small business owners being, in some cases, more concerned for their teams and having to let staff go than actually thinking about their own needs and how they felt. Finally, there's a huge amount of stigma in this, within this community. And you know, mental health stigma is a real issue overall, but when we look at it within the small business community, it can be a real barrier to small business owners reaching out for help because there's can be this feeling or this expectation that you have to be successful. And if you're a business owner, you have to be moving your business forward. And the reality is that that is not always the case. There's going to be bumps along the road, especially with what we've lived through over the last 2 years. And there's a lot of businesses that have struggled. There's a lot of businesses that have gone through tough times. In fact, I'd say it'd be hard to find one that hasn't. But it can feel like for some, if they reach out for help, it's a sign of failure. And business owners can be very proud and not want to be seen as a failure. And all of these things combined make this a group that can be highly reluctant to seek help. Now, I believe we've got a poll question here.
Yes, we do, Mel. Thank you for that. So yeah, just another quick poll for everyone. So we'll launch the poll now, and we just want you again to select the response from the list that pops up. If you don't get the poll, don't stress too much. You can actually put through your response in the public chat as well. So all we want you to do this time is tell us, have you had a client in the past 2 years you've been worried about from a mental health perspective? So there's just 2 options, yes or no. So just give you a second to pop through your responses, and then we'll share the results and come back and discuss that. Okay, looks like everyone's been quick to put their responses through. So, Mel, it looks like we've got about 70% of people at the moment saying yes and 30% saying no. So we'll share those results to the screen so everyone can see them, but I'll hand back to you now so you can talk
that through. Thanks so much, Julie. And you know, that's really interesting to see a figure that high, because the research has shown us that small business owners, when they do reach out for help, they're actually more inclined to reach out to people who they class as their trusted advisor, such as their accountant or their tax professional, somebody that they trust, somebody who knows them within the work arena. They're actually more likely to reach out to these people for help, people like yourselves, rather than coming to a service like Beyond Blue. And so that shows that how important it is for you to come along to these sessions and learn about mental health and be able to have those conversations with your client. So in terms of some early outcomes that we're seeing from the program, like I said, was launched in March, and we're seeing some absolutely fantastic results. When people come into the program, they often show a loss of hope. They have no direction. They really need guidance, and they've lost their energy or the motivation, and they're feeling those early signs of depression or anxiety. The early outcomes that we're seeing so far indicate that when people leave the program, they're feeling much better. They've overcome the issues that they had, and they actually feel much more capable of dealing with issues if they arise in the future. So we've got 95% of participants actually felt more equipped to deal with these similar issues if they arose in the future, which shows that the program doesn't just help with issues that you might have now, they can actually help you with issues when they arise in the future. 96% of participants would recommend NASBO to another small business owner, and 95% of participants, this is quite interesting, they said that they felt more productive and able to address future business challenges if they arose, which was just great to see. We're getting some fantastic testimonials. I've included one on here, and I thought I'd just share with you one that we received yesterday from a participant who was talking about how they felt when they came into the program and how they felt when they came out of the program. And the way that they described it was it felt like night and day. That's how significant this program is in terms of how different they felt and the improvement they saw in terms of their recovery. So how do you inquire? Well, there's 3 simple ways that you can inquire. You can either inquire via the Beyond Blue website. You can inquire by telephone, which is 1300 945 301, or you can also email us. We also have a pack, what we call a stakeholder pack, which is designed exactly for people like yourselves, people who can be a great connector with your clients who might be going through a difficult time. And I'll make sure that's distributed after this webinar, which is a pack full of digital assets, copy, flyers, wallet cards, all this wonderful promotional merchandise that you can use to promote the program. Now, I think we've got one last poll here.
Sure thing. Let's go with the poll. So this is the final one, and what we're looking for this time is, do you know where to look for resources or help if you have a small business client or self-employed person who's struggling? So I've got 3 different options for you there: yes, no, or I'm keen to learn more. So once again, we'll just give you some time to choose your responses there, and we'll share the results with you in a second. Okay, so let's stop the poll there, and it looks like we've got roughly 53% saying yes. Oh, that's just gone down. So 50% saying yes, 11% saying no, and 39% saying they're keen to learn more.
That's great. Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you so much, everyone, for your participation in the polls. I'll now hand back over to Linda, where we'll start our Q&A.
So this is a really joyful part of the presentation. I hope it's useful for you. I've got some questions to ask Mel, who you've had the joy of listening to, and also Tim Hoopman. Tim is a Beyond Blue speaker. He shares his experience of mental health at work with the public. One of the services Beyond Blue has for the community is you can actually have you can have volunteers come into your workplace or your community organisation and speak, and Tim is one of those brilliant and wonderful people. Tim is a small business advisor. He's a former small business owner, and he's part of the community, and he's become a bit of a thought leader. So we're absolutely thrilled to have him come along today, and I'm going to ask Tim and Mel some questions, and please also feel free to share some questions as well, and Julie will help us answer some of those towards the end of the Q&A. So just to kick us off, Tim, and to help us understand your context and background a bit, can you maybe share for the group why you became a Beyond Blue speaker, what's your motivation, and what impact does that have for the people that hear?
Great, thanks very much, Linda. Very nice to be here and good to chat. So first and foremost, I became a Beyond Blue speaker 3.5 years ago, because when I ran my small business, like a lot of people, I struggled with high levels of stress, and those continued for me for longer periods of time, and it eventuated in anxiety, and I didn't really know what was going on at the time. And so when I sold my business, I wanted to help other small business owners, and I thought, where would I go? And I decided that I would go to Beyond Blue and start, and by joining their speaker network and doing wonderful events like this. So really the key for me was I didn't really know what was happening. This was quite a while ago, probably about 10 years or more years ago. So there wasn't a lot of discussion about mental health. So sessions like this weren't around, so there wasn't a lot of talk. So it's great to see so much discussion about mental health. And the one thing that I did it for, and hope to inspire in other people, is just a general awareness, take the stigma away from having a discussion about mental health, and in particular for anyone that is struggling to seek help early. And the other aspect of it then is also to feel confident about checking in with other people. So every time that I talk, if someone goes away and maybe checks in with their medical practitioner about themselves, or checks in with somebody else because they might be concerned about it, that's a really good outcome. And I'm very proud of doing that. Thank you.
That's a fabulous answer. Tim, I'll ask another question for your good self. Just what has the last 18 months been like for you? And I guess two parts to this question. You're part of the small business community. You're a business advisor. You give that sort of support. What's it been like? And how have you also, really practically for everyone listening, how have you looked after yourself in that context? How have you looked after your self-care? And can you give us some examples of that, please?
Okay. I'll try and remember all those parts of the question. You might have to remind me. So first and foremost, what I've experienced and also what I've seen by doing a lot of talks like this and speaking to a lot of small business owners is that as small business owners, and Mel talked about it before, we're under unbelievable pressure. You know, there's cash flow issues, there's, work-life balance, there's all sorts of things happening. You know, some people have struggled with fires before the pandemic started or floods. So there's always a lot going on. But one of the things that I found in particular over the last 20 months is, in addition to all that, there was this lack of control. I felt very much out of control a lot of the time. There were decisions being made that were out of my control. I felt sometimes, angry or helpless or hopeless or fearful, all sorts of different emotions that went through. And it was very challenging. And even now, seeking help from the government or restarting small business. I know I've talked to other people where, they're just tiptoeing through all the HR and, what do I need to do about vaccination versus non versus this versus that. There's a whole minefield of things over and above everything you need to do as a business owner to keep your business operating and to be profitable. So very, very challenging times. So a couple of things that I'll touch on. One of the things that I did, and this was last year, was I had to shrink down my frame of reference. Now that might sound a little odd, but in the very beginning, I worried about the whole world and everything that was going on, and I consumed the news and I swirled around. So I started to bring that back down to Tim, in Sydney, in the eastern suburbs, in my community, what was I in control of for me, for my family, for my business, for the people around me, for, you know, teams, clients? What was that I was in control? Once I started to bring it down to that, yes, everything else was going on, and I understood that, but I started to focus on what I had in control. So it was really, really important for me to do that. And then some of the other things that I did was, first and foremost, I would recommend to everybody that as a business owner, as a small business owner, whomever you are, you need to take care of you. It is not a selfish act, and we need to put ourselves at the front. And in particular, for so many of the listeners, you're dealing with lots of small business owners that you would have seen in distress. They might have been in distress, they might still be, all of those things. So how are you taking care of yourself? So some of the things I like to do is around my lifestyle. So it's exercise, diet, and sleep. Pretty basic, but often we forget those things. So how are we getting out? How are we going out and doing some exercise and all of those things? Really important, and you've got to do it consistently. Second area is social. So how am I staying social? How am I connecting with people? How am I making sure that I fill my cup full of things that make me happy while I go about living in this challenging times and running my business? For me, is practicing gratitude. Go about thanking people when you're at the shop, wherever you are. Smile and say hello. But also practice gratitude each day. What are 2 or 3 things that you're grateful for every day? And it's a really simple thing, but it provides really great feelings back. And it's something that I do every single day. And I did it this morning after my swim, looking out at the ocean, and I just rattled off a few things I was grateful for. It really, really makes me feel good. And finally, with work, which we're all spend a lot of time doing, what are those boundaries that you have around work? How are you looking after yourself? By putting some of those boundaries in place, the only person that can do that is you. So how are you doing that? When are you starting and finishing? How are you making sure you're taking breaks? How do you say no at the right time so that you're taking care of you? So they're just a few things that I do. In this challenging times as a small business owner, we all need to take care of ourselves. Thanks, Linda.
Such beautiful advice there, Tim. And I think that real key about filling up your own cup and looking after your own self-care in order to support others is such a critical role. And by supporting others, that can be in work, it can be in a more formal context. There's a question I've noticed in the Q&A which actually aligns with one of the questions I had here prepared for Tim, and it's about supporting others. I think we're really mindful of the real power of having conversations for mental health. We're not encouraging and suggesting everyone should become a counsellor or become an assessor, but I guess, and this comes to your point around boundaries, Tim, how can you have a conversation with others? It might be at work if you're a business advisor or a tax professional, but how do you keep those boundaries in place? What do those conversations look like, particularly in a work context? And how can you do them in a way that's sustainable for you, which doesn't necessarily go too far, but can actually have a really positive result? What does that look like?
Okay. I've learnt a lot over the past 3.5 years with working with Beyond Blue about how to have those conversations. A number of years ago, I wasn't very good at it. I was probably a little concerned that I might say the wrong thing, or what if I ask somebody a question and then they feel like I have to fix their problem or become their counsellor? Those feelings are real, and I think lots of people that I've spoken to have them. They go, oh, I couldn't start a conversation. But here's a couple of thoughts from me. One is, when we're taking care of ourselves, we put ourselves in the absolute best position to then support others around. And for a lot of you out there, you're dealing with small business owners every day. Take care of yourself, And then it helps build a little resilience to face some of the challenges that you are faced with some of those small business owners. But remember, when you check in with someone and show them care, it might be exactly the right time to do it. Now, one of the things that I've learned and how I've done it over the time is I'll look for changes in behaviour. You might be in a meeting and someone might be consistently absent. You might not see them for a while. They might be a client that you just can't get hold of. And you think, sometimes I used to think, oh, what's wrong with me? But maybe something is different for them. That's not their normal behaviour. So if you notice those things, sometimes stepping into a conversation in a very authentic, in a very empathetic way, and just showing general concern is a great thing to do. And when you do that, very first thing I do is I kind of ask when I'm checking in, is everything okay? I've done this before. I've noticed that every time we catch up, you're not really present. You're on your phone, you dash away. Is everything okay? I'm just a little concerned. Then the next thing is to do something that's really important, and that's listen. And I know sometimes we just want to help and fix people, but just listen. And then listening is really good. And they might talk a little bit, they might not talk much at all, or they might share with you. But listening is really, really important. You can encourage action. And, Mel spoke beautifully today about the new access. That could be something that you could refer them to. It's soft, it's easy, it's not a thing. Or sometimes I used to say to people, have you checked in with your GP lately? Maybe that's a place to start. But some of these resources are great places to give them. They're soft. They could read something, or they could maybe contact NASBO. And then finally, just leave them. Check in with them a bit later. Make sure that you are there to support them, and say that you're here if they need to talk. And I think one of the things is sometimes you'll get different reactions, and whatever those reactions, they're okay. I've been in a situation where I've checked in with a really, really good mate of mine, and his reaction was everything's fine. And that's perfectly fine for him. Even if I don't think it is, it's perfectly fine. Or another time I checked in with him, he told a friend of mine, he said, I don't know why Tim's telling me to go to the GP. That's actually okay, because it's actually all about them. It's not about me. So whatever their reaction, whether they share or they don't, or whether they say things are fine or not, just the fact that you're there supporting them is a really generous thing to do. Thanks, Linda.
Thanks, Tim. We might go a couple of minutes over, and if people need to leave, that's very understandable. So just a couple more questions for Tim and Mel. Mel, you spoke beautifully about new access for small business owners and how tailored it is for the small business community. A small business owner like Tim has been such a proud champion and benefit for this sort of service. I was hoping you could briefly describe some of the other tools and supports and things out there that people might be interested in or find value from.
Yeah, 100%. There's a number of resources that are available, and I know that they're going to be distributed at the end of this webinar, which is fantastic. But there's a couple of things that I would really recommend people reach out to learn more about. First would be the Small Business Advisor training course that we have available. This is a fantastic course. Basically gives you, it's designed for people exactly like most of the people that we have listening to this webinar today, people who would be considered as a trusted advisor, somebody who's in a role where you're meeting with small business owners and you're in that perfect position to say something and help if help is needed. This course gives you the tools to equip business advisors to have a supportive conversation and know what to say, because it can be a very difficult conversation to have. It can be uncomfortable to talk to someone about their mental health, and perhaps sometimes you don't really know what to say. You just know that something is wrong. It's an instinct is telling you that something is wrong. This course is fantastic because it gives you those tools, it gives you that language, it gives you the words and the confidence to start having those conversations. And there's some training modules that you can go through to support you with that process. And like I said earlier in the presentation, there's strong evidence that shows that small business owners are actually more inclined to reach out to their trusted advisor, people like their accountant or their tax professional, rather than come through to a service like Beyond Blue, because that's just how small business owners are designed. That's what they prefer to do in terms of reaching out. The other thing I would recommend, just very briefly, is something called a wellbeing plan, and we have these at Beyond Blue. We've put these together. These are fantastic, and you can do these for yourself. There's personal wellbeing plans, and there's also workplace wellbeing plans that you can do with your team if you want. And these are templates that you can complete as a preventative measure. In the same way that you would complete your business plan, you can complete a wellbeing plan, which will allow you to identify potential triggers, things that can actually impact your wellbeing. So you can identify those potential bumps in the road before they arise, and then look at what actions you can take to avoid those. So those are the two tools that I would mention today.
Thank you, Mel. Such great resources. We'll make sure links to all of those are sent to the registrants afterwards. Last question for Mel and Tim, and just a quick note to everyone, we will check all the other comments and questions afterwards. If there's any FAQ we haven't got to, we're really keen to cover that off. But just if I could ask each of you if you have a key takeaway or some key advice for people watching. Mel, Tim, if you could ask people to do one thing, what would it be? And we'll maybe start with Mel first.
My advice would be, please take down the telephone number for new access for small business owners. Take down the link. Even if you don't feel like using it today, just put this somewhere safe. There may be a time in the future that you think, you know what, it'd be worthwhile me reaching out, or there might be somebody that you know, or somebody that you work with, someone in your family, one of your friends, somebody that is connected with you that you might be a little bit worried about. And this could be a great way to reach out, give them that number, and make a really great, engaging referral in a really kind and sincere and empathetic way.
Thank you, Mel. And Tim, any last reflections, comments, actions for the audience?
I would really love the audience to go away and every single day do one thing that puts a smile on your face. So don't do the same thing every day. Could be something different each day, but just consistently do something that puts a smile on your face every single day. And watch how over time that again goes and fills your cup, that makes you feel great, that, you know, really puts you in a position where you're taking care of you. And just see how the positive effect that has on you. Go and give it a try. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tim. And back to Julie. And just a reminder to everyone, all the links and resources that we've been mentioning, the training course, new access, will be included in the email sent afterwards. So thank you, Julie.
Thank you so much. That was such a great presentation. So thank you all for being a part of that today. Unfortunately, we don't have time to answer the questions that have come through in the chat, but as Linda indicated, we will get to those later on out of session. So please hold on and we will get to you with your responses there. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of information just to keep in touch with the TPB. And first of all, you can visit our website at tpb.gov.au. You can also follow us on social media. You can subscribe to our monthly newsletter at tpb.gov.au/newsroom. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we have recorded today's session, so you can go back and watch that at any time that's suitable to you. And the good news there is that you can actually claim CPE for viewing any of our webinar recordings, and we've got a comprehensive library there for you. A big thank you to Mel, to Linda, and to Tim for providing all that wonderful information today. It was so useful, I think, to everyone on board. And I also want to say thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us today. We know that it's a really busy time, but it's really appreciated that you came along today. We do hope that you found it beneficial, and it's a good way to keep up to date. As we've said, it does count towards your CPE. So if you are interested in attending another one of our webinars, just jump on our website again and go to tpb.gov.au www.gov.au/webinars. And just quickly, one last thing before we finish, we will be launching an exit survey, and it would be wonderful if you could just complete that. It's very quick, and it'll just pop up on your browser once you leave the webinar today. It's a great way to just let us know of things that you're interested in so that we can come to you with webinars that are relevant to you. So once again, everyone, thanks so much for joining us. We do hope that you stay safe, and please enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks, everyone.